How's the sound? Is that okay?
Yes,
Yep. Perfect, thank you very much. So, yeah, welcome to tonight's budget workshop. I just want to thank you all for coming. I know your time is valuable, so thank you for coming to spend it with us so that we can listen to what you have to say, so that we can get your feedback, and of course consult on this important process. I'd like to just acknowledge a few of the people on my right. So there's the Mayor, Anne Monceau. If I can get each of you to give a wave as I introduce you. I'd like to introduce you to Councillor Lillian Henschke. I'd like to also introduce you to Councillor Mike Dawes, Harvey Jones, Kerry Hallett, Peter Cornish, Jane Davey, Jenny Turnbull, Joe Harvey, and Di Wilkins.
With respect.
My apologies, I'm just getting to that. So the speakers for this evening include myself. My name is Matthew Stearman, I'm Director Corporate. Joining me on my right is Chris Kelly, the Chief Executive Officer. And I've got Chris Birch, who's the Group Manager, Finance and Risk, who will be taking us through the financial things a little bit later. So I would like to do an acknowledgement of the traditional owners. We acknowledge this land that we meet on today is the traditional land of the Kaurna people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the Adelaide region, and that their cultural heritage and beliefs are still as important to the Kaurna people today. We respect the cultural authority of Aboriginal people visiting or attending from other areas of South Australia or Australia. So tonight, one thing I would like to go through is about mutual respect. So I think one thing we can all agree on is common courtesy isn't always common anymore. So I'd like that we just respect each other, we listen to each other. We will have one speaker at a time, try not to talk over each other. We critique ideas, not people. And save your questions and comments for the end, because we're going to be going through the financial presentation. And it might be quite possible that your question might actually get answered on a following slide. I've also got budget packs on most of the seats. I know we've got a few extras. And I'll also welcome to Councillor Ted Jennings.
Hello.
Thank you. So there's budget packs there, which should include a submission paper and a box over there that you can submit your paper at the end if you haven't consulted yet. And there's also pens and paper around. If you think of a question that you want to ask and you want to articulate it on paper, feel free to do that as well, and then you can include that at the end. If there's any tricky questions that we need to take on notice, for example, if you don't get the opportunity, we will take questions on notice as well, and we'll publish those on the website. The other thing is that this session will be recorded, and we're going to put that on the website as well. We've got 2 more days left of consultations. We'd like to get this out tomorrow, so that those that couldn't make it tonight can at least see the presentation as well, and that we can share that with the community. A couple other little housekeeping items. Washrooms are downstairs, so if you head down the stairs and turn right, then you will find the washrooms down there. And the last thing is, in the case of an emergency, we head down the stairs or down the elevator, and we turn right, and the place where we meet is out in the car park on the right-hand side of the car park. But if all else fails, just follow one of the members of staff. And if anyone has any mobility issues and needs help or an alternate route for going through the building, we will guide you through. So I've been through the housekeeping already, but we will take you through a little bit of the background and why we're here today. Chris will do a budget presentation. We then got a section for frequently asked questions, and of course a spot where it's a Q&A at the end, where we're looking to get your questions and your feedback. Council is here to listen to you, and we'll be looking to capture that, and we'll be capturing notes as well with your feedback. So let's go into background, and I might hand over to Chris Birch to continue from here.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. This is probably the biggest turnout I've ever seen for a budget consultation. Welcome along tonight. Just to give you a bit of a snapshot as to where we are in the process. This process started back in November with some consultation with our Audit and Risk Committee. We've had a series of meetings with both the council and the audit committee over the recent months. And eventually, following some workshops in March, council have endorsed the budget for consultation in April. Obviously going through the consultation process, which is part of tonight, looking at the detail and just seeking your feedback before we present that to a workshop with the council members on the 4th of June. And finally, albeit things going to plan, we will be adopting on the 18th of June. So, as Matt said, a little bit of background as to how we got here. The rate increases for the last 4 years have been as presented on the screen. So we had 2 years of 0% rate increase during COVID times, which was council's intent to just be cognizant of the fact that people were struggling to trade, that there was a number of restrictions. Those who were working were quite often on reduced incomes, and just trying to keep that money in the community in order to keep stimulus going. The following 2 years, they've continued to do that as far as keeping rates below that of CPI. They've tried to keep them as low as they could in order to keep the operations of council going. But ultimately, they have been quite a bit lower than CPI, so 6.7% in total below CPI. And during that period of time, our costs have continued to go up by CPI. We've had, obviously, interest rates go up in the last couple of years, year or so, and we've reached a point now where we're looking at being in a deficit budget for the coming year. There's just some graphs about. So we use a number of different measures to actually have a look at our budget and start to forecast it. So obviously, as a common household, we know about CPI, we hear about the common basket of goods. As a local government sector, we have a modified version of that, which is called the Local Government Price Index. And what they do is they take the CPI data, they pull out the things that councils don't buy, like clothing, like housing and the other materials. They then, I guess, heavily weight things that we do buy, things like road materials, so bluestone, concrete, etc., that goes into our building materials, and they give us a revised CPI that's specifically for our sector. We then take that, and as we look at our budget, we come up with what we call our cost of business, which is a forward-looking indicator as opposed to the other two, which look backwards. We use our budget to work that out, and looking at our costs. So as you can see from the graph on the screen at the moment, our rate increases in the blue line have been below both the industry increases as well as our own personal budget increases. When you break down the local government price index, though, there's actually two components, as I said before. The recurrent budget, which is our day-to-day, it's our operations of keeping the lights on, it's employing our staff, it's water and the open spaces, those sorts of things. That's pretty much kept in pace with CPI. The thing that we've seen over the last 2 years is that the material costs, the contractors of actual construction, are the things that have really ballooned up, and over the last 2 years have been 8% and 11%. There's a couple of different factors behind that. If you've been to Bunnings and tried to buy something lately for your construction, or tried to build a pergola or building work at home, you would have seen that firstly, availability of contractors has been very difficult, so they've been able to charge a premium, but also the availability of materials has been a huge challenge. And when you're somebody like us who's trying to get a concreter to do curb and gutter, they're making a lot more money quicker to pour foundations on a house when we've got a stimulated housing market where they're trying to build houses as fast as they can. So, looking back as a result of those increases, those rate increases that we have had, we're now in a position where our budget is about $3 million short each year on the income that we're getting. So we've had a couple of comments through the consultation process about, well, what happened? You're in surplus. And we were. So if you go back to those early years of the COVID years, we were operating at around a $2 to $3 million surplus. We had a bit of buffer there. The council have used that buffer in order to actually, as I said, keep the rates low for the last couple of years. And now, this year, following a revaluation of our fixed assets, we found ourselves in a situation that we're going to have an almost $3 million deficit, which is what I was referring to before. the reason for the spike in 2020-21 is that was when the federal government was handing out stimulus grants to get things happening that we have to show as income. So there's a little bit of an anomaly with that year, but pretty much that trajectory is on the way down. At the same time, our debt has been increasing. So what council has been doing in order to actually keep those rates low is that they have been closing the funding gap by increasing our borrowings. And our borrowings, I've got on a table in a second, and then I was just going to mention also depreciation, as I just said, following the reader. So had we actually increased rates at CPI, so those purple lines are the same as the lines that are on the previous page, so it's our surplus deficit. The purple lines are what it would have been had we used CPI instead of the rate increase that we did have. So the first 2 years would have been exactly the same. Year 3 was in 2020. If we'd done a CPI increase, which I think was about 2.4% instead of the 0, we would have been about $1 million ahead. And that just compounds through. And with the rebound we've had this year, we would have been about break even. It is a small deficit, but we would have been about break even, and we would have been able to contain that and absorb that cost increase that we've been seeing. But because we've had these compounding shortfalls, that's why we're in the boat that we're in today. At the same token, our debt wouldn't have gone up as much as it is as well. So again, those orange lines show what the adjusted debt level would have been had we been increasing rates at some point. So as I said, depreciation's gone up 2.9 million per year as a result of our rebound this year. And that's really just catching up our operating expenses against the unit rates, the things we've actually been paying for capital construction. So, as I said, we started having some serious conversations with our audit committee earlier this year, and in February they made a recommendation to council that we consider a rate increase in the spectrum of around 8 to 14%. And the reason why that spectrum existed was in order to consider how quickly council wanted to correct this. So they also made some other recommendations around projects and actually seeking co-funding for capital construction. So we're about to do a redevelopment of the Kensington Gardens club rooms. We're only putting a third of the money towards that. We're fortunate that the other tiers of government are putting the other 2/3. The other thing is that council's, as I said, been using that debt in order to fund the budget. And it's kind of like, if you think about it from your own personal perspective, if you kept putting your electricity bill on your credit card but not actually paying it off, it just continues to build. And I mean, not even paying the minimum amount. Like we're intra-year actually drawing down on those borrowings and repaying them with rates, but each year it's increasing by about $3 million a year. Now these numbers are slightly out of date because they were what was presented to the audit committee back in February. So the surpluses, if you compare them to the current budget, isn't quite as accurate. The new budget's more accurate. But it gives you an idea of what the audit committee were considering. So 8% allows council to correct this problem over 3 years, whereas the 14% pretty much fixes it this year. We're back in surplus. We're still needing to borrow a little bit of money to fund this year's budget, but as we move forward, council will actually start to repay the debt from next financial year. Whereas in the 8% model, it's another 4 or 5 years before we start to turn that vessel.
Sorry, Chris.
Yep.
Just get back a slide. Yeah. Can you just talk about the same?
Oh yeah. The other thing is that by doing it earlier is that we'll save the interest cost, so on that borrowing. So the difference between the 9.8 and the 14% models, which are out for consultation, is about about $250,000. So $250,000. So long term, that equates to about 0.5% rate increase. So although the two models, what they actually consider is a 14 this year or a 9.8, when you start to look at next year, you're looking at a 7%, in the realm of 7% next year with the 9.8, whereas in the 14% model, we're looking to go back to more like a CPI as we're going forward. And that getting that money in earlier is what, through the 14%, allows us to save the interest and reducing the borrowings. So looking forward, as I showed before, that cost of business has really risen up. There's a couple of factors which I've got on the next slide that are driving that, but the fortunate thing we're seeing is that CPI and LG price index are starting to come back, And that's because the Reserve Bank's done the work it's doing to keep costs down, but it's also, we've seen over the last couple of years increases in our contractor rates, because obviously CPI indexation clauses in there. We're starting to see those now start to taper off as the CPI does. The thing that is really driving that cost of business index is that depreciation that I was talking about. So it's the increase in what we're paying to get things constructed and our consumption of those over the future years. There is also 3 additional staff budgeted in next financial year to fill some of our forward-facing areas of community development, environmental sustainability, and agriculture section. And then we do have an allocation with our enterprise agreements, superannuation's going up an extra 0.5% next financial year as well. And then we've got an upgrade of cash receiving module. Fortunately, there are some offsets though. Our electricity, those of you aware, electricity really peaked about 18 months ago. Council is on some short-term contracts to go through that peak period, and as a result, we've been able to sign new contracts that will reduce our electricity going forward. The other thing is that our biggest consumer of gas, which is actually the heating of the George Bolton Swimming Centre, is being converted to electricity, and we have a large solar system there that will largely drive that. And so we're expecting quite a large savings with that particular site. So as I mentioned, Council are currently out to consultation with effectively 2 models. Council endorsed the 14% model, but it really was, literally was a split decision in the chamber as to whether the right path was the 14 or the right path was the 9.8. And obviously the 9.8 is cognizant of the fact that people are struggling. We have got a cost of living crisis at the moment, and that phasing in. But as I said, it means that we're borrowing more money in the short term in that gap. So what that means to the average ratepayer. So the average property, and I'll talk about how rates are worked out in a second, but the average valuation in the city of Burnside is $1.36 million, so capital value of that. And for a property of that value, assuming that it has moved at the average valuation, their increase under the 2 models would be $299 under the 14% model, or $209. So there's a difference of $90 per annum, or $8 a month between the two different models. As I mentioned before, so these numbers have been updated. So with the 14% model, we have a small surplus of about $100,000, whereas the 9.8 we would still be in deficit for the coming financial year. And as I said, it's that time to get back to surplus and the time to start paying the debt. The difference between those 2 models is it's a couple of $1 million in outstanding debt after 5 years, but the kicker in that is that we save $250,000 in interest costs over those 5 years. And then just graphically, I guess, showing that this is the two measures we've been talking about. So our operating surplus, so this is a percentage of ratio. As you can see with the 14%, we get back to surplus quicker as opposed to the 9.8% model. But the important thing is that we start repaying debt earlier, and we start to get that under control. It's not that debt's a bad thing. So this is our complete debt portfolio. So that blue section is our fixed loans, whereas the orange bit is our variable loans. As I said, it's not that debt is bad. So the grey bit is new loans that we are still foreshadowing that we will need. And we're trying to get to a position where we're not borrowing money for everyday things. And when I say everyday things, I mean capital works. It's not running the operations as in cutting the lawns and those sorts of things. But we are reaching a point where we're borrowing more and more money for construction of renewal capital. So it's basically replacing or resealing a road or replacing a stormwater drain. Debt is a good thing if it's used in a correct treasury management process. And so for things like intergenerational equity, which means we borrow money on the people who use the asset actually repay the loan, we are still looking at having some new loans. So things in the budget like the Kenzie Gardens coverings I mentioned before, the Regal Theatre upgrade that is envisaged will happen in a couple of years' time, and also if the Marrickville master plan goes ahead, there's loan borrowings in there to fund that as well. So we're still looking to borrow money, but for the right reasons, and not the renewal capital that we've currently had ourselves in situation. So one thing I just wanted to walk through, what does a 14% rate increase mean? Because I'm seeing the consultation already coming back, and there's a real theme coming through that people think that what we're doing is we're increasing the rate in the dollar by 14%. And the comments are, my value's already gone up, you're double dipping, and not happy with that. So what we mean when we're talking about a 14% rate increase is it's an increase in the total value that council envisaged collecting. And because the city is roughly stable in the number of assessments or properties that are created each year, that equates, as I showed on the previous slide, to the percentage amount that an average person can expect to see an increase in their rates. If your valuation has moved at the same average as what the whole city has, so if you read our annual business plan, where the early draft information we're getting from the Valuer General is that the average valuation across the whole city is about 4.2%. So if your property has gone up in value by that 4.2%, then you can expect your rates to go up by about the 14%. It's where you get those variations, and there will be some outliers that have gone up or down. They've gone up by a lesser amount than the 4%, and there will be some that have gone up by more, and that's where you will start to see some variations. And as I said, rate in the dollar is a calculator that we use to disperse the rates throughout the whole city. As you can see over the last couple of years, these are our rates in the dollars that we've actually applied to properties, and this is the movement each year, as opposed to the amount that council increased the total rate revenue. The other factor that's missing up there is that the valuations are going up and down with that. And obviously in 22-23, when we reduced the rate in the dollar by almost 20%, that's because we had an almost 30% increase in our valuations across the whole city. 2020 is an anomaly again. The VG actually decided to scrub all the valuations. They actually put them back to 2019 valuations because of, obviously, the world was a little bit different at that particular point in time. So how does council work out rates? So for last year we had rate income of about $45.7 million. This year we've worked out in our budget we need to collect about 52 in order to balance the budget. So it's an increase of 6.6 million, which is actually 14.5%. Now the reason why it's different to the 14 that we've been talking about is that we expect that additional 0.5% to come from new properties. So subdivisions, new apartments are being built in Glenside, even the new shopping centre being built across the road. We're expecting the new rates to come from those new constructions contribute about that $230,000. The remaining 14% will come from the existing stock of properties. So whether that, and there will be some valuation fluctuations in that if you've done an extension, so if you've built a pergola on. So there are some minor things that might cause the valuation to go up by more than that 4% average. But on the par, we expect that everyone who has had a property last year will be in that $6 million. So what does council do when it actually wants to work out the rates? It takes that $6.6 million increase and it divides it by the valuation of the entire city. So 3.6 billion dollars that it actually divides it by, and that is what gives us the rate in the dollar. That we then times by the individual valuation, and we send the rate notices out for that amount. All right, so I just wanted to step you through how this actually works, because it's not, we actually don't really consider the valuation of each individual properties, or even the city as a whole, until we actually get to the rate billing process. At the stage we're in, where we're talking about this 14% rate increase, we're talking about the total amount of rates we need to collect from the entire city. And as I said, that does translate to an individual property just purely because we have a consistent number of properties year on year. We're not a growth council like Mount Barker that's adding properties each year. But the good thing with that is that we also don't have a large amount of assets that we're not adding to it with those that's needing to be funded out of that growth income. So if you're a Mount Barker, you're needing to add roads and footpaths and curbs and street lighting and all those sorts of things. While there is some argument about higher or medium density properties putting a higher pressure on our open space, it's really an extra bin and some other services that we need to provide. As I mentioned before, so yeah, just that reconciliation between the rates last year. So last year the average was 2,100, whereas this year is proposed to be with that 14% increase of 2,400. So I guess as part of the March workshops, Council had a look at a number of different things. It wasn't just an automatic go to rates. They had the administration under quite a bit of pressure to find as much savings as we could. And a number of questions were asked. First one is there any savings available? And there are a number of savings that Council has found over recent years. I've got I might just move to it. There's a table on the next page that Council's sourced and achieved these savings over recent years. Some of them are quite large numbers, but there's a bit of a mix in there between projects that have either been deferred or cancelled or not gone ahead, and also actual recurrent savings. The Audit Committee cautioned against having any more savings. We traditionally put these savings targets into the budget, and even though we did a zero-based budget process last year, we still had a $300,000 saving in the salaries area for vacancies, and we haven't been able to achieve that. We're already in deficit, but the staff vacancies haven't been there to actually achieve the savings that we had envisaged. So as I said, the Audit Committee actually cautioned us against doing that this year. They believe that we've reached a point now where there isn't any savings to be found in the budget. And if we are to find it, it's actually going to be through service reviews, like as in service reduction, rather than actually necessarily doing things more efficiently. So yeah, leading straight into the next one, can we cut services in order to save money? And this is probably the conversation that we need to have over the coming period of time, because we're not sure which one to cut. As you would have seen in the documentation, we've got about 120, I think it's 122 services. We're receiving continual feedback through our community satisfaction surveys that everybody loves these services, that they're happy with the level of service that we're providing. But we are starting to seek, and you'll see in your papers that are in your hand, about which services would you actually consider cutting if you were to cut one. It may not be that we cut a service altogether, because pretty much every service is used by someone in some form. Not everyone will use every single service, but a service is used by everybody. Council has a number of mandatory regulated services that it needs to provide, whether it be animal control or planning, and those sort of regulatory functions, but there are actually a number of services that are officially deemed discretionary. But we can imagine the public reaction if we started talking about some of these items, whether it be verge mowing or reduction in our parks and gardens. These are the sorts of conversations we would need to have with the community about which oval do we stop irrigating in order to allow it to brown off in the summer? Do we close the library for 1 day a week? Do we not have the pool open for as many months of the year, or increase the gate income fees as you come in the gate? Next question is, can we reduce the number of staff that we have? The current level of staffing is complementary to the number of services we provide. So it comes back to that previous conversation about, if there's a service reduction potentially, but not for the amount of services we're currently providing. The benchmarking with other councils shows that we're already fairly lean, and that we do a number of services collaboratively, whether it be immunisations and food inspections, with our neighbouring councils. We reduced the number of managers in 2017 from 12 down to the current 6. But one of the things, if you are looking year on year, is that we've actually, although we haven't cut the salaries, we have cut the labour hire that actually is a contractor cost. So it's a little bit lost in that bigger number of the contracts, material and other, but there is a reduction of the amount of temp staff that we plan to use next year, assuming that we will continue to have this full complement of staff. Can we defer capital works? It's an easy one to look at, but generally what happens is if you defer capital works and don't keep up with what our asset management plans look at, it just leads to additional maintenance costs. One of the biggest things that's detrimental to a road is actually water. And so those squiggly lines, those crack sealing that we do each year to keep the water out, actually protects the asset. If we didn't arrive at the agreed intervention point and undertook the reseal that was planned for that particular road, and water gets in there, it's where it starts to soften the road, the crack becomes bigger, which effectively becomes a pothole, and the cost to replace that and becomes quite large quite quickly. And then we have insurance claims and those sorts of things against damage to vehicles. Last one, I guess is the last one. Contractor costs increasing. This year on year, as I was mentioned earlier, we're starting to see those CPIs. The CPI, I think this last year was about 8.5%. We use the March CPI in a lot of our contracts, including our open space contracts, etc. And so those indexations and the like have really flowed through to the budget. We've also been undertaking a number of different works on behalf of other organisations in partnership. So the McGill Village project, for example, although we had capital construction, the work that we did on behalf of Campbelltown, which admittedly they reimbursed us for, but it does show in our budget as a contractor cost and then a reimbursement in the income statement. But fundamentally, as I said, the cost of materials and as availability of services has drastically increased over the last couple of years. So just before I open it up for questions and comments, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, community consultation has been open for 3 weeks now. The last day to get your feedback forms, whether it be tonight with us, you do have a feedback form in front of you, but online, if you think of something when you get home, you can still provide feedback, whether it be through email or whether it be online through the online form up until 5 p.m. on Friday. We'll be collating all that information next week and distributing it to the elected members for them to discuss on the 4th of June in an informal workshop. And that from there we'll be presenting a final budget for the 18th of June council meeting where they'll make their final decision about endorsing the budget for next year.
Thank you very much, Chris. I hope you found that informative and that set the scenes in the background and why we're here now. What I'd like to do now is open the floor for some Q&A. So now it's over to you. I saw a number of you taking notes and you might have some questions available or some comments to make. I'd like to go through and share the space with the room. So would anyone like to start with a question? I'll start with you, sir.
Thank you very much. Look, some of the items that I have here have been explained in a bit of detail by Chris.
Yes, that's right.
Ladies and gentlemen, inflation in the March quarter, according to Google today, was 3.6%. Yet Council proposing a 14% increase in rates next year. I believe this is totally unacceptable. The Council needs to drastically trim its expenditure like any commercial business that finds its expenditure exceeds its income. This, in my opinion, is a real elephant in the room. It seems to me that Council needs to adopt a raise the gang attitude to its outgoings and extravagances right across the board. I can report the rate revenue increased 3.5% in 2023, as was discussed, 6% in 2023-24, and now 14% proposed in this next year. At the same time, the cost of doing business rose from 2.5% in 21-22 to 6% in 23-24. Now, all these figures I'm quoting are from the Burnside Council's website, so I'm not making these up. So really, what is going on? Why is expenditure rising so rapidly? I've done a very cursory search of some of the Council's annual reports over the past couple of years, and there are some astounding areas, matters that have jumped out to me from the really high expenditure items to the very minuscule items. So as a start, let's look at employee costs. They are shown to be 18.5 million in 23, or 35% of the total revenue of 52.5 million. 35% goes in employee costs. That is 18.5 million was spent for them, 175 employees, which equates to an average of over $1 million per employee. $1 million per employee. Now that Chris is telling us that there's obviously some very fat cats here, because according to the website, there are 9 group managers. 9 group managers. Do we need that many? Now Chris tells us they're going to put 3 more employees on next year. Well, I say let's not employ another single person at that rate. We need an immediate freeze on employing anyone else. And in fact, no replacement through natural attrition such as retirement resignations until the budget is in order. We cannot afford any more employees. Then on the minuscule expenditure scale, we see the council gave $3,000 to the East Way Vikings project. which will enable weekly meetings and demonstrations for members of the community interested in the Viking Age. The Viking Age? What next? We grant grants to those wishing to be interested in the British invaders such as the Celts, the Jutes, the Saxons, the Angles. Then there's the library costs, who according to the website runs at about 2.6 million a year, or 5% of our total income. The libraries, in my opinion, is involved in all sorts of activities which I don't believe it should be involved in. For instance, you can attend workshops in smartphone photography. You can learn to compose, edit and share great photos. What next? You can run workshops on repairing your car or rewiring your house. These are matters for TAFE, not the council's library. The library is effectively running a creche, in my opinion. It says you can join other parents for stories, rhymes, puppets, etc. for toddlers aged 2 to 3 years. And the library has 4,000 toys it lends out. You can attend parenting sessions at the library. Then it conducted 4 workshops exploring mindfulness. What? Mindfulness? It seems to me that the staff of the library dream up new projects to keep themselves in a job and to justify their existence. The way things are going at the council, I want us to tuck us into bed shortly. I could go on all night about the unnecessary expenditure of the council administration. 4,535 on staff meals prior to workshops, council and committee meetings. 5,916 on staff rewards and recognition programs, including catering at all staff briefings and end-of-year celebrations. $1,696 for flowers for staff members. Instead of raising rates, council needs to drastically cut its costs across the board. I don't believe it necessarily results in cutting services, but if it does, then so be it. As there are plenty of services council should not be involved in my opinion, it should concentrate on essential bread and butter services to the exclusion of all others to balance the budget. At present there is obviously an attitude, oh well, it's not my money, so who cares? Well, I remind all staff that it's our money, and they are throwing it around in my opinion.
That's called austerity measures.
In summary, in my opinion, the administration is totally out of control, and if raising rates by 40% affects the CEO and staff too, they should resign. Thank you.
Appreciate that, thank you for that. And there's a few good items in there to consider. But what I might do is also try to keep this reserved to questions wherever, just so we can share the space. There's limited time, so if everyone does a long spiel, then it could take up the time. So I'd like to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to ask a question.
Good people I did.
If you'd like to, you're welcome to identify yourselves before asking a question.
I haven't got a long spiel, but my question is, why is council expenditure increases out of line with the local government expenditure index? Now, you keep talking about the CPI, but that's irrelevant to council. Council doesn't go to the doctor, it doesn't go to Coles, it doesn't get its care. What's relevant to council is the local government consider increase. Now, when I look back over the last few years, I find that the income the council has received is greater than the index. So why are our expenses going up greater than the index? Now, I can give you the figures, but I guess you've already got them. Total income has gone up by 7.5% between 22 and 23. The figures you've given us tonight show an 8.6% and a 6% for the following year. The index is about half that. So these figures are way out of line. Our expenditure is way out of line with the index. Why is that?
Thank you for the question. So maybe worth looking at that slide with the LGPI, would you say?
I'm not disputing you're spending the money. I'm just wanting to know why it's out of line with the index.
Yes. Do you want to give that one?
So effectively, I was talking about through the presentation, we do use the local price index for a couple of our calculations. We've used CPI through the presentation this year, but that's purely because most people as ratepayers understand CPI and don't understand our price index. So I'm impressed that you do. As the chair of the local price
But
index,
using CPI is misleading and supports your argument for an increase.
for us,
The local government index does not support your argument.
as the graph shows,
Your expenditure is higher than the index. Why?
Our capital expenditure this year has been. So as I mentioned through the presentation.
I'm not arguing that you're not spending the money. I want to know why.
I might just ask that you let him answer that question, but,
Yes.
as opposed to interjecting,
Yes.
just going back to the respect.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
So our capital expenditure, as I said, has been increasing. And it's these 8 and 11% in the capital component of the local government price index is what has been increasing. We haven't revalued our assets since 2018. So that reason for that $2.9 million increase is a bit of a catch-up in the annual depreciation.
But a revaluation costs you nothing.
The revaluation itself hasn't cost us much, but the depreciation that has
Costs you
come.
nothing. It's a revaluation. It's
Correct,
not
but
expenditure.
the depreciation that has come as a result of the increased rate in the dollar, the unit rates.
Depreciation doesn't cost you any cash either.
No, it doesn't, but what has been happening is it's closed the gap between our capital expenditure that has been increasing.
Do you
and we-
index your expenditure against the graph your expenditure, compare your expenditure to the index? Which items are out of line with the index?
We haven't done an individual reconciliation.
Don't you think it'd be
What we've done
helpful
is
to do
a
that?
zero-based budget process, and so we've actually sat down with all of our managers and worked out what it will cost to continue to deliver the services for each year.
But you concede your expenditure is out of line with the index.
I think to answer your question directly, your question is why you're out of step. If we look at the slide on the screen here, you can see this 4.8, which we're saying is the base that everyone's costed up by across the industry. When you look at the city of Burnside, you pull apart the key items. The key factor that's really driving this increase is a 6.4%.
But that's not a cash item, Chris. That's a revaluation. It's a book entry.
Can I just explain that? When we say depreciation due to revaluation has gone up 6.4%, what we're talking about is all those assets that we have to maintain throughout the city. The cost of maintaining them has gone up 6.4% above the cost index. That's where the majority of our costs are being consumed. So there's lots of other factors around the edges, but for us, it's this increased cost, which is, if you think about it, when we look at your own cost of living and everything's costing more, as an industry, that is coming through to local government. And as Chris said, there's two ways to deal with it. We could cut back. We could not maintain our assets in the prime condition that I'm pretty sure our residents want us to maintain them in. You all enjoy a city with high amenity. Now, as I was saying, the unit cost of everything we do with our assets has gone up. That's the key component, that's the difference.
I know it's going to increase, but it hasn't got, it should have gone up by the index, not by some arbitrary amount that you've decided to spend. I'm sorry, Chris, I mean, I have great respect for you. I think you're the best CEO we've had for years.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
What are we spending money?
Yeah, so I'm happy to take this offline to give you a detailed explanation. And unfortunately, I can't unpack the different components of our assets to explain where that money's going. But it is in the bitumens, the cements, the stone, the labour cost, if we can get labour, contractors, sorry. That's where primarily it's being consumed, is in the maintenance of our assets. I'm happy to go deeper, just not, I can't go into full detail tonight. Thank you.
Might share the floor a little bit more. I've seen a few hands over here. I might walk over here and let me start here. And feel free to introduce yourself to start with.
Phil Plummer. My questions are really based around the fact that the council planning has been out on the way through. If you know that you're shooting underneath the rates, you know the problem isn't going to go away. So what in the heck was the council and management doing for those years 21 through? When you should have been increasing, you knew it was happening. The debate about the revaluation, I understand where you're going, Chris. I understand where that is, but that's a rolling revaluation. And the council and management should have known that rolling revaluation and knew what the number was, almost down to the dollar as to what that was. Also, I see there's 19 new projects. Now, in a year when you're making a big deficit, I've been through those projects. None of those, in my opinion, are absolutely critical. And if you didn't have a business where you just stick your hand out to get your money, if you were running a real business, you would cut costs. You would not have one new project. And I noticed the list of the projects or the things that were considered to be whether you wanted to do them or whether they were discretionary. They were sort of the top 10. There's 122 services. I'd like to look at the bottom 22 and just see if they're just as critical. Because, lighting and gardens and everything else, yes, everyone will give that a tick, and I'm sure that bottom 22 easily goes. I just think it's lack of planning by the council and management.
Are you still a practicing accountant, Phil?
Well, I've never learned.
Thank you for the question.
Well, he knows what he's talking
I
about.
just want to talk about the comment that the council should have known the magnitude. I'll be the first one to say that as we came through COVID, I don't think anyone foresaw the inflationary pressures that were going to hit the economy. So, in some ways, I'll agree with you.
money printing and no one
I'm not an economist. I just wish I'd bought lots of properties prior to COVID. So in some ways, you're correct. Maybe we should have foreseen some of it. I think the magnitude surprised a lot of the industry. Looking at the services, again, it's the challenge of which ones do you cut. Now, I know you're on the list for me. If I can just talk about those 19 projects that you mentioned. When the council were debating the budget, they obviously felt they were important. But that's what tonight's all about. For our elected members to hear the commentary from a representative of the community, and I'm sure that following this evening, the council will take all into consideration and have a look at that.
If it was a public company and they had to get sales, those 19 projects wouldn't happen. Never.
Thank you. I will work my way over to that side. There's a few hands over here I'll get to first. You've been quite patient. Thank you.
There you go, my name's Tim. I understand the depreciation due to revaluation is quite a difficult thing to understand, but it's not depreciation of your assets. It's actually the cost to maintain that asset. So fair enough. Okay. LGPI, 4.8%. So that includes labour cost. That's a labour cost indicator. So you've got an additional 3% in there for enterprise agreements. Your EBA is going to go up by March quarter plus 0.5% for super. So that's less than 4.8. So really, that 4.8 should cover you for that increase. And you have to give pay rises. You've got an EBA. You've got to do it. But I'm just not quite sure why there's an extra 3% on top of what should already be covered on the LGPI. The other thing that I find I don't understand is we're blaming COVID for this. If you go back and look, you guys have been over budget, or you guys have been spending more than you've been gathering. Since 2015. But this is a 10-year problem. But what happened is you have had this enormous appetite for debt. So every year debt's gone up and up and up and up. So if you look at last year's long-term plan, you guys are going to get into like $37 million worth of debt in the late 20s. 28, 29, you're like 35 million. And then by 32, 33, you're going to get down to about 25 million. And for whatever reason, for a lot of money, you guys are comfortable with that. What's happened, the actual reason why all this has happened, is because you guys have suddenly gone, whoa, that's a lot of debt. We want to get out of debt quicker. And now, your LGP2, now your long-term plan, what, 32, 33, you're down to 8 million. Now, fundamentally, I think that's a good idea. I don't think the council should be in that much debt. But you've gone, let's do it in 1 year. You know, so I don't understand why you've let the financial mismanagement get into this position, and then this massive urge to get out of it at our expense. So I don't understand why you the 3-year plan, yes, it incurs $250,000 worth of interest, but you guys are incurring millions of dollars worth of interest. And up until this year, you haven't cared. And now all of a sudden, in the space of 12 months, your long-term plan has gone from not really worrying about debt to now trying to carve the debt out. And the way you're doing it is through our rates.
And I don't think anyone wants to see a reduction in services. And when you guys talk about cost savings, it's about cutting services. And yes, I understand that there's been CPI and suppliers have been out there gouging, but you know, when are your tenders coming up? You know, when are you know, what are you looking at? You know, what's East West doing? You know, how can you renegotiate these contracts to actually save some money?
I just want to respond just to a couple of points. The comment about the council, coming here exactly words, and if I reflect on the last 4 years where council effectively increased rates less than people spending, I always make this comment: the council makes the right decisions with the information it has at the time. 2020 is amazing. We can all look back and we will make different decisions. But at the time, we had COVID, the year after COVID, and then the flow-on effects. Not blaming COVID, but it's what happened. The council at the time felt that it was the right thing to do to support their community. Now, at some point there had to be a correction. And as you alluded to, we could do it over multiple years. Essentially that's the 9.8 model. Or we could do it over 1 year. And that's ultimately the path the council has chosen to talk to you about tonight. So, if I'm just talking about what we're doing going forward,
The prior 2 years, you could
Sorry,
have done it in the prior 2 years as well, since COVID, could it? And you didn't. And that's where the planning is incorrect.
Well,
Just-
previous years, there's been about 5 people at this meeting.
Yeah, if I may. I just want to talk about what we're going to be doing going forward. And you're quite right, sir. We need to constantly look at how we can do things more efficiently. There's no doubt that is absolute priority. In fact, I was at a meeting today where we're looking if we can collaborate in terms of procurement with our era councils, the group of 6 councils together. So I won't go into detail, but efficiencies and opportunities to improve is absolutely on our agenda.
What's it, latest word?
There's the 2 gentlemen waiting at the back wall there that I'd like to get to first. Sorry, the gentleman, yes. You can pass that on, and maybe what I'll do is I'll get you to ask your question or make your comment. We'll remember that in case it requires a response, and we'll get you to do yours as well, and then we'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Sorry. Yeah. The man at the, just elaborate behind you first.
Thank you. Cheers. There's obviously people that's running past now than me, but I think everybody who's spoken has been spot on about the fact that there's been a planning and management.
Can't hear you.
Hold it closer.
Put it closer to your mouth.
Pretend it's my screen.
Some of the issues that appear to have occurred have been through poor management, bad management, etc. And I think some of the issues which have come before in discussions here are centred around what costs are and where they're going. But I'd like to put in that maybe the rating system itself should be looked at in closer detail. So in 2021, there was a parliamentary inquiry into the Valuer General's office, and it was found that the rating valuations were inconsistent and incorrect. So Charles Sturt claimed that they lost $625,000 in 1 year through incorrect valuations. I think what the council needs to do is have a look at its rating base and have a look at how it allocates rates. So I've spoken to council about this a couple of times. The Burnside Village is a prime example. So that's valued at $170 million by the Valuer General. So I've got a friend who's a commercial valuer, did a desktop assessment, said it's actually a bit more like $350 million. So that's $100,000 in lost rates revenue just on one property, a significant one, for one property alone. So, yes, cost save, but also look at where you can get extra revenue. And I think, you pay $100,000 a year to the Valuer General for their valuations. You don't have a contract with them. You have no quality assurance with them. You have nothing at all to even know whether they're doing the right thing. And so I think the council needs to sort of look at all aspects of its operations and take into account where there are advantages to be taken.
Kim, I'd like to you to say your question.
We seem to be getting we seem to be getting into minute items, but I'd like to stand back, and I don't expect an answer now. But if we look across society, government, when we were all young, was around 20% of GDP. Now it's almost double that. I'd like to know from council what's been going on, what you're charging per capita here over the last, say, 20 years. Because what I can say is in the lifetime of everyone here, Burnside hasn't expanded. It's one of the oldest, I think the second oldest village in the state. The streets are the same. They're the same, almost entirely the same with the exception of all garments on the subbuildings are there. It's the same place. This building, 1927, Hazelwood Park Swimming Pool, 1966, I think. Where's the big capital projects? They haven't been there. So I'm really interested to see that more and more and more recurrent expenditure is being used, and you want more and more income for that. Less and less capital works. If you delay by 1 year or 2 years resealing a road, I don't mean the cracks, I mean asphalt. And there's no accident, there's a whole bunch of asphalt coming up to June the 30th to spend money. That's normal local government. I'm in that industry, so I know what happens. The capital works are not the problem, because you show by your own figures it's recurrent expenditure that's the problem, and that's where the focus is. That's all.
Thank you to have that.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, look, my name's Tim Jordan. I've been a resident for Burnside Council for 40 years. I'm one of the few people actually taking interest. I go to 80% of the council meetings, and rightly or wrongly, people can judge me on that. I look at it another way. Let's keep it simple. There are too many economists in this room. I'm a firm believer user pays. Now, very simply, you could say, yes, why not charge people who want to use the swimming pool? Hostess Drinks for Life, and I'm a member of that, charge them more. Might only be $1 or $2 a time, but it'll all add up. I can remember saying to David Parkin 5 years ago, got a wonderful car park out here. And my argument is, I'm not talking about short term, 15 minutes or 1 hour, 2 hours, and this will hurt the staff, I know, but that's life. 4-hour parking, you should be charging consumers for that. User pays, that's the way the world's got to go, otherwise we'll all be paying 100% of our money to governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. I'll work my way through.
Thank you. My name is David, I live in Dulwich, and I'm actually very proud to be a resident of the city of Burnside. I think we've got great facilities here, and it's a very pleasant environment in which we live, and I think generally the facilities are pretty well maintained. The big gripe I have about the proposed 14% increase was the stated denial of council over the previous 4 years. And if we go back and look at the budget summary that was sent out to residents over each of those budgets, it talks about council exercising great fiscal responsibility in being able to achieve a 0% rate increase. And the reality is that that's not the case. All you did was defer paying the ferryman, and eventually the ferryman's got to be paid. And I'm not personally averse to an annual increase of rates to meet our local government cost index increase. I think that's only reasonable to accept in this sort of environment. But to tell us how well you're managing our finances every year for 4 years, and then hit us with a 14% increase. If we look at the long-term financial plan that you published last year, you talked about a projected 5.5% increase. So it's almost inconceivable that it could have gone so far backwards in such a short period of time. And I think that I used to work in local government, and so I've got a very soft spot for local government employees. But the reality is that you're put on 3 additional full-time employees this year. I think in the current financial year, our staff costs went up by about 10%, somewhere between 9 and 10%, and they're going up by a similar amount next financial year. And a long-term sustainable cut to our expenditure is not possible without some reduction in those staff costs.
Thank you. Sorry, I did write a few notes. I want to make this as brief as possible. My name's Anthony, I live in Roslyn Park, and I spoke to a couple of councillors today. I just wanted to reframe what I think is the problem, because we're talking about costs and revenues, but I want to propose a sort of guardrail, and that's simply that it has to do with affordability. I have no problem paying my rates, so I'm actually here just to talk about maybe the 40% of people who are either retired or have mortgages. There's 23.5% are retired, 18 to 26 have mortgages. That adds up to 42.1%. So most people are affluent, but some people have either withdrawing from their super or they've got a mortgage, they don't have stress. So I sent the councillors today the Australian Wage Price Index, and looks like you've seen it, and also the increase in Burnside council rates, which I plucked from your chart. And from about 2015 or 16, they kind of remain in lockstep. And I totally agree with keeping rates flat during COVID because a lot of small businesses and people are under pressure. But then we've arrived at this point where in next year, council rates will be 11% higher than the increasing wage index, which, if you think about a person's income being high, council rates took up, a certain wedge, and if it's 11% higher than wage growth, average wage growth, it's taking up a bigger percent of that pie, which puts pressure on households. It can fracture families, leads people losing their houses, their mortgages, all kinds of things. So I'm just suggesting as guardrail that we look at the wage price index and council rates and try and keep it in lockstep. So that's the way to think about it. And I had 2 cost suggestions. John, who spoke not long ago, he may have, he's still there. You should listen to him about infrastructure because I think he builds mining camps worth hundreds of millions of dollars a year in all sorts of countries. I myself am in infrastructure and utilities analyst, and that's also utilities. They look at utility bills as a percent of incomes and try and keep it flat so they don't hurt people. But the cost ideas, there's 2. One is deferring some infrastructure replacement, exactly what John said, because, for example, the gutters on our road got replaced. I talked with my neighbours who were all quite surprised because they function perfectly, and they could have been extended for 10 years. And I get the point, they crack, they do need repairs, but I just think that's a really easy way without cutting soft services. You just defer some of the big capital works, push them out, and looking at your cost inflation chart for capital works, costs are really high. I don't think you get great value for spending a lot on CapEx at the moment. I think, but basketball hoops that stop kids from spray painting and vandalising cars. I'm all for that. The second thing, and it may be controversial, there's a bit of grey hair in this room, I've got some myself. My neighbour across the road, whose husband has been retired for 2 years, don't worry, I'm not going on a tangent. He was a partner of an accounting firm. She said to me 2 weeks ago, Anthony, I just found out I'm able to get the council to send someone around once a quarter and do some home handyman stuff, home help. And I was like, oh, okay, that's good. And then she said, and also, I can get someone to drive Dev's, I shouldn't have said her name, across town for $3.50. The council will do that. And I thought, okay, council Uber. And I started thinking, well, Susan, you're actually, I shouldn't say that. You're paying for this through your rates, and actually it's being socialised among everyone else. And it occurred to me, the elderly services, is that really state or federal government that should be doing that? how much is really kind of the nice to have that the council is doing, and I'm not sure how much has been spent on that, but I just thought deferring infrastructure, it doesn't cause anyone any pain, and some of the, like, I like old people and I like my neighbour, but I just thought, is that right to socialise that cost? So anyway.
Thank you for your commentary, and also thank you for sending through that analysis earlier to council in terms of the wage index.
I just want to comment. Two insightful areas you've chosen to look at there. So one of the things I'm going to do after this evening, and was already in train, was I will be talking to council about our intervention levels, about when we look at maintaining assets. The second one, with aged care, I'm actually pleased to report, probably for the last 6 months, we've actually been undertaking a detailed study to understand that very part of our business. And we're shortly going to have a conversation with council. So, two insightful areas, so well done. Thank you.
Thank you. I will come back up front. There's a couple hands that have been waiting quite some time. Hello, Peter.
Peter.
Speak up.
Just a couple of
Hold the
points.
microphone at the bottom and then it'll work.
I won't reiterate what everybody else has said, but by and large I agree with it. I think the bottom line there is that you should be, the message is you should cut your suit to suit the cloth. And I think there's plenty of discretionary spending that can be attended to. But just a couple of points. There was a reference to intergenerational equity, this idea that the people today borrow to the hilt and leave the next generation to pay it off. They have no say in the spending, no say in the debt. They have HEX debts, enormous challenges in respect to getting some real estate of their own, and then we're going to lump them with a debt. And the long-term financial plan that you're putting up now, 2024, 2033, shows a net financial liabilities ratio rising to 75%. Now that is absolutely unacceptable in a mature council like Burnside. Maybe Playford, maybe Mount Barker, they will grow into their debt, but not in Burnside. And I really object to that. If that was Tasmania, Victoria, and a couple of other states, you wouldn't be able to go beyond 50% without state government approval. Because at the end of the day, the state government's responsible for the council there. One final point. There are off-balance sheet debts and expenses that you're incurring. And one of them is that you're indicating that you're going to pay $800,000 to ERA Water this year. ERA Water, I think, is a total disaster. I'm not sure that it's solvent, I'd like you to comment, because in the 2033 papers, it had assets at one stage, this is the current assets, 86,000, and liabilities of 205,000. So is it solvent? And you know, perhaps you should consider putting it in the hands of a receiver.
You've been very patient there. I'll go to you and then over to here next. And then, sorry, just a comment. And I'll come up to you afterwards.
Thank you for those comments, sir. I do need to talk about Era Water. I actually sit on the board of Era Water, so I do have some first-hand insight. I'm pleased to say it is solvent. If it wasn't, I wouldn't be sitting on the board. I'm certainly not going to oversee an insolvent body. It's fair to say, I think with hindsight, council would not have gone near Era Water. But we're in a position now where we are trying to get Era Water to a position where it is sustainable. We have some way to go. I'm not going to say it's fixed. It's probably nowhere near that. But we are trying to make the best of a difficult situation. But I can guarantee, absolutely solved. Thank you, Matt.
Well, it's only solvent with another 800.
I'll come back up here first. So 1, 2, 3, and then I'll come back to you if that's okay. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Thanks very much. My name's Alan. Thank you very much for the presentation, very detailed and good explanation. On the financial side, I think what would be good to know is what the 122 services are, so we have a good idea of them, what the new ones are, and might I suggest that those could be listed on the council website and invite people, residents, to come back with ideas. It may be that recycling something once a month rather than every couple of weeks. But a lot of good points have been made tonight. I won't go over them, but just encourage management and the councillors to take them on board, because a lot of good common sense in running a business. It seems to me generally that the can's been kicked down the road over the last 5 years, even allowing for COVID, taking into account the increase and substantial increase in valuations in the council area. But I think at the end of the day, that even though we may have surveys for the council that people like this, people like that, that we've got to cut our cloth according to our needs of what we need rather than what we want. And I'd be happy to take a dozen people, non-councillors, out of this room and have them go through the 122 services and knock off 10, something like that, and I'd be happy with the result. I think we all would be. That often, we can sort of be experts or think that's nice to have, rather than what is needed in the case. Now, Anthony talked about curbing coming in Roslyn Park. I've been living there, most of my life, and our curbing is probably about 1959, early 60s, still to be updated, despite comments in the past. So I never know how decisions are made in this regard, and I think inviting residents to make comments in that regard, you're going to get effectiveness and practicality in some of the capital works about the day-to-day expenses.
Thank you. For your information, there is a spot on the website called the A to Z of services. So most of the services are listed there as well, but I think you've provided some good feedback and input for consideration for the group on those services.
And even the breakdown of them and percentage of cost or something like that.
Yeah. Thank you. And additionally, there is an asset management plan set that actually sets what we're going to be setting for our ratings on the different infrastructure components. So they've got half a dozen of those, and we do consult on those as well, and what the intervention points are for those assets. So that is a separate process, and we do get the feedback back. I can't remember how many responses we got from community consultation, but fair few. So we do talk about that, but thank you for your feedback.
Just on that building asset management plan, the building asset management plan is using 2018 valuation data. We had a valuation last year. So why is that?
Yeah, it's one that we're looking to improve our services on that as well, in terms of doing annual desktop valuations as well, so that we stay up to date, so we don't get that depreciation shock that we've got this year, for example. There has been a very patient fellow just over here, so I might hand over to yourself.
Thank you very much, and must admit, first off, I'm a council veteran, haven't been to many meetings, and don't know much about finance design, so I'll steer clear of that. My main question is about this whole process. So we've had a wide open consultation session for a period of a month or so. We've got the session tonight. The cut-off day is tomorrow. Friday. It's ostensibly tomorrow, based on looking at the start. What happens? Like, the commentary goes into a black box, and then some people sit in the room somewhere and decide what they want to make about comments tonight. Is this not just a venting session? I'd want to have a session like this at the very start of the period. Then the council goes away, takes what we've said into account, then comes back and reports back at near the end of the period about what changes have been made based on the feedback that's been given, rather than some people sent in forms. We've had a little bit session tonight. So what?
what happens, but I'll be here.
Thank you very much for the question. So the next steps are that the feedback from tonight is obviously we've got council sitting here, they're listening to what you have to say, and they will be the ultimate decision makers on the budget. For the next steps, after the consultation closes, we take everything, especially everything that's been sent by email and through the forms and forms that you sent tonight, and that will be provided back in a workshop to council. So they'll get to see all of the consultation, they'll get to see what the community believes, on top of tonight's sentiments and everything that was said to us. From there, this will go back to council for a decision, so that'll be introduced to them at a workshop, then it'll go to another council meeting where they'll decide what path to take and what they're going to do as a result. Yes, it's a public council meeting. That is the third Tuesday of the month in June. Now, you've been very patient over here in this corner, and then I'll come back this way. You have been extremely patient. I did say that I'd come to her first, but then you were next after that. Sorry about that, and thank you.
Okay, well, I'd like to question the initial premise. I don't know what everybody else is paying in their rates, but in 2022, we paid $3,359.25. Then in 2023, we paid $3,660.95. That's up 8.98%, a whole lot more than the CPI. In 24, we're supposed to be paying $3,917.90. That's another 7%. So our rates have gone up in 2 years 16%. I don't know what everybody else is paying. I'd like to think that we're not propping up an ailing concern, but that just means that revenue has gone up. This rubbish that rates have not gone up. What on earth has been happening? And as for offering us the alternative of cutting services, I mean, heavens, everybody could point to things that are being spent on that we didn't actually ask for. I went down to Tusmore Park to play tennis last weekend. They have paved an area where we used to sit on lovely green grass. They've paved an area the size of a tennis court with brick pavers. Beautiful work, lovely edging. Would have cost tens of thousands. None of us asked for it. None of us really wanted that mural either, because the toilets used to blend in nicely with the background. And then, of course, there's the bin police. Who wanted the bin police? The people that come around at the crack of dawn and inspect your bin to see whether you've put the right things in the right bins. That's a ridiculous use of taxpayers' money. Sorry. And there are so many other things. I could go on, just in my own area. We don't want a whole heap of paths crisscrossing Beaumont Common. We've had 2 public meetings saying we don't want it. But that's what they're going to do. That's the plan that's being presented to council. And then there's the git that comes around and puts poison all over the common every jolly day. I mean, you could get rid of him, for starters. I'm a bit like the person in the Ricardo who says they've got a list. I've certainly got a longer list than that, but I'm sure everybody here could add things that they think. Why on earth are they doing that? Why are they spending? It's as though they're looking for things to spend money on. I'm really disappointed that it's come to this, that we're told that we're going to have a 14% rate increase.
Thank you very much for your feedback. As Chris Birch had mentioned before, in terms of the valuations, I'll just touch on that one a little bit. Even on a year where it's 0% rate rise, depending on the valuation of your property against the average valuation of the city, that could affect whether there was an increase and someone would have had a decrease on the rates.
Has anyone had a decrease?
Anyway, so you have been extremely patient, and thank you.
Thank you very much. My name's Jenny. There are a couple of things I want to say. The first is that I think this council is far too extravagant and always has been in its spending. And it's stunned me for, I have to say, over 35 years, I've been stunned by the amount of spending. Facilities are gold plated, they're upgraded when they're not required, and as the previous person said, pathways are put in where they're not required, they're anti-environment in any case. A whole variety of things are overdone and we don't need them and most people don't want them. So there's too much spending. Cut the spending and everything else might be fine. But certainly don't squeeze ratepayers. There's no more juice from ratepayers to be able to pay. We're already cutting back. My other concern is about community consultation, and that was touched on a moment ago. The way in which this council consults with the community, it should hang its head in shame. It is inappropriate, it is anti-community, and it happens in a very tokenistic and disrespectful manner. To hold a meeting today or tonight, for example, is far too late in the process. To send out surveys, this survey in particular, which provides two choices to respond to, is completely and utterly unacceptable. Our survey last year did the same thing, also completely unacceptable. Other surveys that this council sends out are constructed in a manner that is just so reactionary and defensive and pointless. And it's the type of community engagement that occurred back in the 80s. I work in the field of community engagement. It is not how you engage with the community. I do think this council has a deep-seated culture with pockets of brilliance, I have to say. However, a deep-seated culture that pervades, which does not help residents at all. One of the pockets of excellence, I think, is the reception staff in the council. They're just beautiful people, get things done, and there are a couple of other areas. The library, I think, is superb. But overall, cut the spending. Do not, for example, engage in upgrading the Kensington Tennis Club and Burnside Rugby Club club rooms that will end up being a total of $9 million. 2.9 agreed to by 8 out of 3 councillors here in this council. Those of you who might not know about it. We can't afford $2.9 million on this building. A total of a $9 million expenditure, some of which is coming from the federal government and other from the state, is going to end up building a Taj Mahal in Kensington Gardens Reserve. But who wants it? Only the clubs involved want it. The community don't need it or want it. That's really what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience once again. You've had your hand up for a while, and as of you, so I'll do these two next, and then I'll come back over there.
Thank you very much. James from Fruitvale. First of all, I just want to thank the council for the work you do and the corporation for the work you do. Tough job. The one thing that there was a talk over here was talking about what soon could be 140 services and projects, going by the numbers you've provided. The problem I have is...
Could you speak up, please?
Yeah, sure.
Stand up.
Okay, so the problem I have is that every time in my area, I'm asked, what do you think? When I'm consulted about a new project, I'm asked, how do you feel about it? Do you want it? And I might get a budget figure there. What I don't understand from that is, well, how's that going to add to my rates? And especially in regard to this issue about the list of 100 or soon to be 140, it would be, I'm glad that you mentioned there's a website, a page on the website that lists all these services. When I'm asked about a new thing, a new project, a new service, what I'd like to see in one page of that is that list of 140 services, 122 services, what percentage each of those, with some sort of brief listing of what they do, the KPIs they do, and whether they're meeting them, what percentage they add to my rates, and what the new project is going to add to that, so that I can actually make an informed decision about, well, okay, this sounds like a great new project, I'd love that thing, that's big and shiny, I want that. Who would say no? But I might have been asked in context of the total costs. I would just like to see a slightly more holistic way of being consulted with. I'm not saying, do you want this? I want to be asked in the context of what it's going to add to my rates, not just some arbitrary budget figure that means nothing to me.
Thank you very much for that.
Thanks, mate. It's a very good point you raise. And I'm pleased to talk about the approach that the Audit Committee have resolved that Council undertakes going forward. What happens now is that every month in Chris's monthly finance report that he puts up to the Council for them to review, should the Council have considered or wish to consider a new service or a new build or a new project, the Audit Committee has asked that we articulate that in terms of what will the impact be on future year rate rises. So the Council is given that information to enable them to make informed decision, and obviously if it's a project that we're going to the community with, I think going forward, that is the information that we will be providing.
But I'd add to that list is what do I think about the other 140 services too. So if I want to make a comment, I don't have to put a tick or a cross or massive comment next to 140 services. But if I've been hearing here a whole lot of dart throwing at particular services that people don't use. They could be very, very vital services to particular people.
Yes.
So we need to get a better idea of who wants them and are they happy to pay for them. And if they're not, maybe we need to look at funding elsewhere, not the ratepayer.
Absolutely right. And I would mention the Council has no issues at all about reviewing services. The fundamental challenge we have is who uses them, who's impacted, and ensuring that we listen to those, to all voices, obviously, to make sure that, for example, we don't cut a service which is fundamentally favoured by the majority, for example. But that's a fundamental challenge, but we can work through that.
The other thing about knocking services is also we sometimes don't know the ongoing cost. If we get rid of it, we don't see the long-term cost of it. Like knocking families again, like taking toys away from the libraries.
Yeah.
The world is a bit more complicated than just cutting costs.
And I know tonight we're talking about the financial implications, ramifications, but obviously there's some services like the toy library, which you'd argue have a positive social impact that we also have some regard for. As an example of impact, I just want to target the bin inspection. I just want to quickly talk about that, because I do like to think we don't just do stuff just to spend money. With that one, believe it or not, what they're looking for is people that are putting recycling or green waste in the red bin and helping to educate people, because for every...
The police aren't allowed to go through my bin without
Let me say what we're trying to achieve.
I think that's a great idea to get people using the right bin.
But this is the one area, for example, that we see a direct correlation between educating people to do the right thing, and then we spend less ratepayers' money on the waste tax or disposal charges at the other end.
It's insulting the residents' intelligence. We're not really fit. We know what's recycling, we know what's rubbish.
No, most people do it wrong.
And trust me, I would never insult anyone's intelligence. But what happens is people get a bit lazy, they don't think about it, it just happens, or the kids are doing it and they're not aware. So it is one of those areas where I think it's money well spent. Maybe we need to rethink smiley stickers, but we'll work on that.
Thank you. You've been very patient. Over to you.
Thank you. My name is John Darley, and I live at Toorak Gardens. If I can go back to the presentation, my understanding is we were told that the council laws...
John, could you speak up a bit?
Going back to the presentation, my understanding that the council laws were provided with a range of rate increases from about 9% to 14%. My understanding of how government works, the administration would have worked that out. Did the administration also recommend a figure to the councillors between 9 and 14%? And if so, what was it?
Thank you for that. For part of the answer is it was actually our audit committee that came up with the 8 to 14%. In terms of the figure recommended by council, we did recommend the 9.8 to council, but then they looked at that, looked at the information, and went for the 14% because of the savings in the longer run in terms of the $250,000 interest savings.
So they ignored the council administration.
Yes, it's your turn here. Thank you for your patience.
No problem. My name is Des. The key issue that leaps out of me is the fact that this council over the years has developed a growth model. We go back a few years, and many of you would have lived in Burnside in the 70s. Then we had an alderman and we had councillors, and they directed the council. And the council comprised a chief executive, otherwise known as a town clerk, and a city engineer. And what we've witnessed the last 20 or 30 years is a massive growth in the administration of this council. We've now got, I believe, 7 people on the executive, 7 executive managers, where there used to be 2. One of those is vacant. We're also talking about bringing another 3 staff on. Perhaps a starting point, using what one of the speakers said before, is to cut the cloth to suit and do a restructure of the executive team and the whole staff and start to reduce the numbers through natural attrition. Because every time you have more people in the administration, that leads to more services. And we've talked tonight, several people, about the 140 services. Every time there's a survey, it's all in that motherhood stuff. You know, do you really want to look after your parks? Of course we do. But they don't say, here are the 140 services we're offering. We'll pick you up from your home and drive you up to Mount Barker for a morning out and a cup of tea. They don't show you those services. And if the council really wanted to listen to what the people are saying, they would take on what that gentleman back there said, list all 140 services, show the cost of each service, and ask a simple question: do you support that service, yes or no?
Here, here.
I will just make one small correction. There's 3 directors in the executive team, so you've got your chief executive officer and 3 directors. There's 6 managers underneath, and as Chris said in his presentation, in 2017 there was 12 managers. So we actually went through a saving rationalization of management then. If you compare that organization chart that's on our website to any of the other councils, we have the leanest management structure in local government.
My name's Stephen English, I'm in Rose Park. One of the questions I'd like to say is, we're talking about surveying the ratepayers. Now, on the current plans, all of those surveys will be sent out in the mail. Now they cost somewhere $1.50, $2 or more, with all the printing involved and the mailing houses and whatever. There's something been around for 30 years, it's called email. Now, who in this room does not have an email? Interesting. Why does the council not get the email address of every ratepayer and every tenant, and then they can cut down their mailing costs by a huge amount? Because we've got 20,000 properties, and if you talk about $2 per mailing, that's $40,000. Now, we're saying tonight we should have more surveys. Let's say we want to have 10 surveys a year of different issues and whatever to get what we think. Well, that would be $400,000 if you're doing it this way, snail mail way. But if you do it by email, it's not zero, I'll admit. You've got to have staff who monitor and update them and whatever. But it's certainly not $400,000. Most people, many people, have the same email for 20 or 30 years. So it doesn't change.
Can I say one thing there?
Thank you very much.
80%, Commonwealth Bureau of Statistics in December of last year said, ABC, 80% of emails are not even read in this country.
That's right.
You know that? 80% are not read. And as far as the process sent out by the council, half of them going straight into the recycling bin and don't read it.
Well, they might.
Now, let me finish. You've had your say twice. I've got a booklet here of questions I'd like to put to the council tonight, including the salary of our CEO, had a $50,000 bonus last year. Why? When we're all finding it hard, everyone's finding it tough, and the CEO, with all due respect to his position, gets a $50,000 bonus. So if he sends $50,000 back, that'd be $250,000 around interest.
I'm actually really pleased to take that question. I didn't ask for that increase, and in fact, the council weren't given any choice in it. The state government, in their wisdom, and I'm saying it facetiously because it wasn't a good decision. I was quite happy on what the council had determined that they were paying me. The state government set up an independent body, and they have determined what every CEO across South Australia now gets paid. So the council actually gets no choice in the matter.
Can I ask you what packages now?
Sorry?
I know it's on the website. What's your package now? I don't have a website because at the moment
It's all public information. As per this register's come out, so cash, car and superannuation, that's 319 pounds.
Politicians get more.
Yeah.
I get as much as that, sorry.
But as I say, state government mandated it. Unfortunately, that was taken out of the council's hands.
Yes, not your doing.
No,
I've already asked
I
all
just-
the council
I just need to share that for the room.
Can I just add to this as well, please?
Yeah,
Well,
just before you do, and I will let you in just a moment. How many people are left to have questions? I'm conscious of time. I see one here, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we'll do yours and then we'll do those 4 last questions.
Yeah, look, there's a few things that I would just like to mention.
We can hear you pretty well.
No, I don't need the microphone. There are a lot of people in this Burnside Council who are asset rich and cash poor. I'm talking about the 42% on your records, on your own documents, over the age of 50, and of those, 26% are retirees and seniors between 60 and 64 years of age. Now, these people are struggling. I'm on a pension, and I'm finding it a bit tough at the moment. So I made an inquiry to the council about the suspension of rates. And with this, I got an answer, oh, well, yes, come, you'll send the information out to you. Because on the back of the rate notice, it says you can apply to suspend your rates to either fall off the perch yourself or you sell your property, and then you pay it back. So to my interest, I then got the information from the council, and they said, on the information sheet, yeah, we can do this for you, but it's compounding interest, for Christ's sake. You know what that means? It just keeps on adding up and adding up, adding up. So that can be totally devastating to a person or the family of the person who passes on or whatever. So I spoke to the Office of Public Integrity in South Australia. They came back after 3 weeks and said, oh, nothing we can do, it's legislation. I said, well, change the effing legislation, for Christ's sake. Because this is bullshit for people who can't afford now to pay their rates. And tonight on 7 News, before I came down here, it took me 10 minutes, by the way, to get in here, because there's no one out back telling us where it was. All right? That's why I was a bit late getting it, sorry. But I appreciate being here tonight, and I wish we had more people in this council area who showed a little bit more interest in what we do, because too many people sit on their asses and are so apathetic about what they do in this council, which is a pity. If more people showed interest, we would be a better society, we would have a better council. And I've had an A-frame out on my driveway for the last 2 or 3 weeks, advertising tonight's meeting. I'm surprised but delighted to see at least we've got this many tonight. And I rang my sister today and said, listen, I think you better change the venue because the council chambers ain't going to be big enough. And to her credit, and by the way, one of those A-frame signs, which one of the gentlemen in this room drove past earlier in the week and took a photograph of my frames inside my driveway. Why? What a waste of goddamn time. I think I know he's here. And so why would they do that? And in that, I've got, don't blame the mayor, ask the CEO. We're getting a few answers tonight, with all due respect, Chris, thank you. And I haven't met these guys yet, but I was late getting in here. But I'll finish by saying, I don't have a bloody money tree in my backyard anymore, all right? My lemon tree died because for 7 years I was stuck in my house with anxiety. I couldn't leave my front gate. I tried to get help from the council, no help at all right? Because I hadn't been checked by ACAT, all right, aged care services or whatever. So I struggled. My sister helped me, and I'm grateful for that, all right? But there are a lot of people out there who are stuck like me in a situation where, and my friend's across the road, and he's a senior manager for SA Water. Our sewerage rates are going through the roof because the value of generals are putting the prices up, as are the emergency services levy, etc., etc. So everything goes up, including our rates, because the value of generals doing this and whatever. So Peter and Athena, who's a senior manager of SA Water, their parents are in a situation now, they live in the Burnside region, they are now being forced to sell their property because they can't afford to continue living in their house. And that's how bad things are getting. At the end of my street, the corner of Kings Avenue and White Road, there's a ghost house. It's been vacant for 4 years, bought by overseas interests, no one lives there. And the bloke next door to me is a very well-known journalist, and he said, Pete, this morning, no one's lived there for 4 years. So how many ghost houses do we have in council at the moment? I bet you don't know. In New South Wales, there are 40,000 ghost houses at the moment, owned by overseas interests, with no one living there. They're paying rates because they've got filthy rich, plenty of money trees. But I don't have one of those, I'm sorry.
All right, thank you. That was Peter, right?
Yep.
We have met before. Yeah,
We
I
have
thought I
been,
recognized you,
yeah.
yes.
And I've got a black mark against my name because I actually questioned the situation about this draconian thing about suspension of rates. It's
No
got
black
to
mark
change.
from my perspective. We
No.
met on another
No,
matter.
no.
Sorry, thank you for your patience. I believe you have the next question.
Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me all right? Yeah, hi, my name's Deb and I live in Turret Gardens, and I hope I don't upset you with this, but I do look at what people put in their bins because I know that that's going to end up costing us more as ratepayers. Unfortunately, and I often ring East West because I can see that people have done that. Unfortunately, they're just toothless tigers because unlike other states, we don't have any legislation around what goes in what bin. So local government can't really do anything about that except educate to try and keep, the cost of that down. So I do fulfill that. But I think you guys can all hear that we're trying to come up with solutions apart from hiking up our rates, because yes, a lot of us are doing it up. And so I just would also ask at the workshop if you don't have that catered for. Thank you.
Can I just say one thing about 7 News tonight? 7 News said there are people in this country right now who are burning candles because they can't afford to pay their power bills. There are people going without food because they can't afford to put food on their goddamn table. And this is we're not a third world country, for Christ's sake, because everything is getting too much for people, and it won't be long before there's a revolt, because people have just had enough.
Thank you, Peter.
So far,
No, thank you. I will share the floor a little bit more. There's a few more that had a question. Did you have a question as well?
My name's Brett, Turret Gardens. I'm more actually interested, I think that gentleman over there raised a question in terms of this process. So you guys on the executive come up with the scenarios for the rates, is that right?
Yes, we did. So we got the guidance from the audit committee, and then we set the scenarios that was within that parameter, and then that was shown to council at a council member workshop, which showed multiple scenarios under that. And then council picked their top two and discussed that at a council meeting, a public council meeting, and that's why you have those two options that are now in front of you for this.
So if the councillors picked the top two, which is the ones you presented in the Engage survey. So now after this consultation process, given the councillors have already pretty much chosen 14%, what's the likelihood that you guys are going to take the feedback on board and maybe come up with some different scenarios for us to have a suggestions, basically?
I may hand that one over to Chris.
Thanks, Matt. One of the things that, and I know the council are very clear on this, it has always been 14% subject to committee consultation. And I'll certainly be, I feel as part of my responsibility to the council and the community is that I need to collate, or my team and I need to collate all this information and present it to the council in an easy digestible format, so that they can actually understand what that feedback's been. So I know our elected members are open to the feedback, because during that council meeting, if anyone had a look at it online, it was a finely balanced decision. You know, half the chamber thought 9.8, the other half thought 14. Our poor acting chair in the night had to make the captain's pick on that. The council was serious. It is genuine consultation, and I'll do my level best to present it to them in a format that they can actively consider it, rather than just blindly stamp a figure. Thank you, sir.
Now I'll bring this over to one of the most patient people in the room over here. Just 1 second. Thank you for waiting.
Excuse me if I don't speak properly, but I've got a husky voice at the moment. The name is Wally Williams, and I live in Dulwich in Mellington Street, and I've lived there for 90 years. Give or I've seen good councils come and go in this council, and I've seen good and bad councillors come and go, and boy, have we had a bit of each. But my question is to the CEO. That 50,000 bonus, did you say that the state government demanded that they pay that? Well, then maybe the state government should have paid it.
It's still us.
I'll be back for the next one.
I know it may come as no consolation. There's a band, and I was very happy with this. The council have chosen to go for the lowest part of the band. I'm saying it's no consolation. I'm just trying to put context that the council hasn't been frivolous with the poor hand that they were dealt by the state government on that one.
There was a follow-up question there.
Make it brief, Wally.
I wasn't having a go at you, at the council, but I just couldn't understand that point that the state government can rule that you have a bonus. That doesn't happen in public and private enterprise.
They set a pay scale for all CEOs and local governments statewide.
Anyway,
all 68 of them.
my apologies, not to take it personally. I've got nothing against you or the mayor. I think she does an excellent job as well, and some of the councillors. But no comment. Some accountants on there are very good too. They know how to pick holes. I just wanted to ask, why didn't we get a bit of paper agenda for tonight's meeting? Because since the beginning of the meeting, there's been no slide even showing what's on the agenda. And could we have that in future, Chris? I had one other, I can't remember what it was. Oh, yes, I presume you have a secretary taking the minutes of this meeting.
Oh, it's all being recorded on the camera over there. That's for staff training, of course.
Could we all have a copy of that, please?
I will do you one better. I'll put the video of this entire meeting onto the council website tomorrow, so you get to see all of it in
You've got to
completion.
remember that some people do not have internet.
Oops.
Today's society, a lot of organisations think that everyone's got a mobile phone, and they haven't. There's at least 20% of the population that don't have, a lot of pensioners that don't have it, right? And they don't have internet and emails. So that doesn't work. And at the moment, my computer has gone down, and I've got to change the supplier, so I can't see anything to do on that at all. So you've got to realise that at the other end. The old system of advising people in writing works well.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, it feels like there was somebody I was missing with that last question. Was it yourself?
No. My hand up.
but looking at the, everyone, they are pretty old in the society, and maybe, I've been a couple of years in this council. I'm not saying I'm youngest here, but having said that, I have experience in other places as well. Like, I'm from India, but I've worked in Tokyo as well, in some other countries as well. The council has, other avenues of income as well, not only rates. So did someone, the parking is one thing, but then there are other business avenues as well, where the council have thought about that. What other, not only South Australia, but other councils which are cash rich, what they are doing different, and how they are maintaining, how they are making sure they have avenues other than rates as well.
Thank you very much. Yes, lots of councils have different investments, for example. One thing is user charges that one of the gentlemen talked about. Thank you. And so the fees and charges is reviewed every year. So that's one where there's some feedback that we've got as well that we could have a little bit more of a look at. But we did review every line of our fees and charges as well. But then compared to our rates revenue, it's significantly smaller. I don't know the percentage, but it's minuscule. All right, thank you.
Can we expect that you will publish a summary of this meeting for council and therefore public, so that we can see what you're saying to the council?
Yes, certainly. I was going to mention that in response to Wally's query, appreciating that not everyone's on the internet. As part of the council report that will go up, there will be a detailed section of that report which will summarise and collate in the most transparent way I can. So yes, that information will be public and it will be contained within the report, so everyone will get to understand what that was, to understand how council's going to make the decision. One more question, and then we're going to wrap it up.
One other question.
Okay.
Years ago, this council had a reputation of being the most litigated council in Australia. Is it still the case? How much are we spending on legal fees against residents who've got problems with trees, with car parks, with carports and stuff? Nothing directly at you guys. I'm just saying, are we still in trouble?
I'm actually pleased to say that one of the key KPIs that the council set me when I was recruited was to keep Burnside on the front page. And if you think about it, I think it's been going okay. We will still incur some legal fees where, for example, we get someone cutting down trees inappropriately. I think our community would expect us to hold people to account.
Yeah, sure.
We are doing our level best to keep our legal fees down as low as possible. Certainly not trying to put ourselves in a situation where we're going to incur them. But we will still have some fees in the future, I'm sure, where we will need to be reactive to certain things. But believe me, I think if we analysed our legal fees, Chris, that they have been coming down year on year. So I'm pleased that the stats go in the right direction.
So we're not up there anymore.
Right, I'm going to hand over to Matt. I'm sorry, John, I'm going to finish up, mate. I'll catch up with you after if you've got any questions.
Just to answer a question back here. No other council, but Burnside is on the front page with the 14% rise.
Biggest one on the state.
Okay, just before I hand the Matt to close up, I was waiting for someone to pull me up on that. And the council made a bold decision and was aware that it would bring scrutiny. Hence the reason why we're here this evening. I'm going to steal some of Matt's thunder, but Matt, I'm sure, was going to say that without you coming out this evening, the council would not have understood where you sat on this matter. So thank you for taking the time and coming out this evening. And it is critical that
any of the others. The nearest is Hobart Bay, and you're at 7%. So we're twice as much as the nearest.
So I'm going to hand over to Matt to wrap us up, but just in broad strokes, I do want to thank you. I understand it's an emotive topic, and we respect that. And now we'll summarise it the best we can, and the council will actively consider it. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, everybody. Yes, Chris did steal some of my thunder there, but thank you all for coming. There was some really good dialogue and discussion there. The room was very respectful. very appreciative, and we will capture all this information. Thank you once again. This has been great, and the turnout has been amazing. We thought it might be, but there you go. So thank you all. Appreciate it, and have a great night.